As to law enforcement, police reform is an immediate action item. Advocacy groups have released lists of demands on that front. More than 65 organizations co-signed such a list, published by the African American Roundtable in Milwaukee. It includes calling for police to stop using rubber bullets and tear gas on protesters, doing away with curfews, withdrawing the National Guard, and shifting funds away from the police and putting that money toward health and housing initiatives. Joining me now is Angela Lang, Executive Director of Black Leaders Organizing Communities, or BLOC. She joins us from Milwaukee, and thank you so much for doing so.
Thanks for having me. I think this conversation is important. Thank you.
Why has every state in the nation and Wisconsin risen up to protest the killing of George Floyd?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question a lot. I think, we've seen murders at the hands of police for decades now. Even the Rodney King beatings, this is not something that's new for us. But I think, the way I kind of frame it and the way I think about it is that it's like a soda can that's just been shaken up for years and decades, and with no real tangible solutions in ways for real, truly policy reform. To me, it feel like this was only a matter of time. I tell people all the time, I was in college when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and, Dontre Hamilton in 2014 in Milwaukee, and Seville Smith in 2016. And this feels different. It feels that, society, Black and brown and Indigenous folks, we're all saying enough is enough. And, we keep seeing these things happen. There's these outcries. And then a couple of months later, it seems to go back to business as usual. And I think what we're seeing is really community and society as a whole saying enough is enough. And we want real policy and legislative changes.
Because what does Floyd's death represent?
I think it represents murder at the hands of police due to a structural system that's really rooted in white supremacy. When we think about law enforcement, we can really look at the history of sheriff's departments and law enforcement in general that were really enacted during slavery to catch runaway slaves. And when you're founded on that history and, the system is only evolved, it still has its roots in white supremacy. And we've seen just these killings and these murders really just be at the hands of law enforcement that are meant to protect us. It represents the Black and brown bodies that are being criminalized merely for existing. You can't walk down the street. You can't listen to loud music. You can't sleep on a park bench. There's so many things that we can't do, and we're being criminalized just for merely existing. We can't run away. We can't wear a hoodie. We can't buy Skittles. There's so many different things that we are criminalized doing. And I think his death and quite frankly, his murder is really a symbolic of how Black people and brown people are viewed in this country and the stereotypes and threats that people think and impose on us.
How exhausting is it for you and others to fight the same fight over and over again?
It's incredibly exhausting. It's draining. It's traumatizing. It's triggering. It's emotional. It's something that seems like it's an ongoing issue. I've been organizing for about 12 years now, and pretty much since day one, I haven't always organized around these issues, but these issues always crept up and really intersected in the organizing that I was doing. And it seems that things aren't changing. And so much has happened in our country and in the city and in the state just in the last week and a half. And being honest, I cried a lot this last week and a half. Last weekend, I needed to turn my phone off and take a mental health break. I woke up Friday at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and seeing Donald Trump's tweets about if the looting starts shooting. All of that is incredibly dangerous and frightening for communities of color, and to have to constantly, be in the streets, either taking a knee like Colin Kaepernick and peacefully protesting or escalating. It seems that we're not being heard, and we have to really beg for our own dignity and for our lives to be just as valued as our allies and as white folks. And it's incredibly exhausting to constantly have conversations and to constantly be in this fight to really just amplify our own dignity that people, for whatever reason, don't naturally see.
One of the things organizers and advocates have signed on to is an official declaration of racism as a public health crisis. What would follow from that kind of declaration?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think that's a first step, is to really label how racism has impacted us, whether it's in terms of trauma or being murdered at the hands of police and everything in between. It is a public health issue. When Black girls are going missing or are being trafficked, that is a public health issue. When Indigenous women and girls are going missing, that's a public health issue. And we should be treating racism like that as such. When we see trans women specifically being murdered and hate crimes on the rise, all of that, those are hate crimes, and that should be treated as a public health issue. And we need policies to really protect all of the marginalized communities. We need to be able to understand the white supremacy that is deeply entrenched in our law enforcement and in our policies, how we're able to express ourselves, understanding our limitations. And we're not really offered the ability to thrive and to dream the way that other communities are. And so I think it really goes to really evaluating how money is allocated, whether it's on a statewide level or even on the local level. In Milwaukee, nearly 50% of the city budget goes to the police department, while the health department, which houses the Office of Violence Prevention, is only funded at about 2 to 3%. That is an incredible lopsided budget, and it really doesn't prevent crime, and it doesn't protect our communities. And so we really need to think about how we're investing and ideally divest from the criminal justice system. You know, typically we spend more on the Department of Corrections and the Department of Justice than we do on our education system. That goes to show what our values are, and budgets truly are moral documents, and we really need to allocate dollars to actually divesting from the police department and putting it into resources such as mental health, making sure everyone has access to quality health care, to quality education, to youth opportunities in the summer, transportation so people can get to living wage jobs. All of those things are factors about a safe community and lead us to actually have a decrease in crime instead of actually spending so much money on law enforcement that, as we're seeing right now, is only escalating the crime.
In the wake of George Floyd's death, has violence in the streets during protests co-opted the message in your mind and taken attention away from the discussions of racism and deaths of Black people and these inequities of which you speak?
You know, I think the violence or the looting is being framed in a difficult way. No one wakes up and is so angry and is so traumatized. No one wants to wake up and be that angry and burn something down. And I think it's not really our job to tell people how they should deal with their trauma when we're seeing very public executions. You know, people are saying that these are modern day lynchings. And we saw when Colin Kaepernick took a knee and he peacefully protested, and the backlash. And so, you know, for people to kind of, for lack of a better terms, tone police how people are expressing their trauma and frustration, it's difficult. And I think it's taking away from the message of the pain and the hurt. And again, it's not ideal. No one wants to be burning things down in order to be heard. But I think there are some times where people feel that is the only way. You protest peacefully, you're not being heard. And so I think it's natural, and I think it's understandable that people feel the need to lash out in this way. And we really need to, in that particular conversation, we really need to be centering people's lives over the value of property. At the end of the day, property can be replaced, people's lives cannot.
Midweek, as you know, criminal charges were upgraded against the Minneapolis police officer who knelt on the neck of George Floyd, and the other officers are now being charged. What's your reaction to that?
You know, I think it's a step in the right direction. You know, it's encouraging. We'll see how the system plays out. If I'm honest, I'm never too reliant and too confident on the criminal justice system as how things play out. We see how it disproportionately impacts our community. And we've seen time and time again officers being acquitted. And just because charges may be brought, we really want to see the charges be able to stick and people actually being able to be held accountable. And I think also, I get this question too, is, just because charges are brought, do I think that the protests are going to die down? And I think we're living on this precipice right now that it is so much bigger than George Floyd. I think people are really starting to understand that this is a systemic problem, and this may have been the catalyst and the spark for that change, but people are really peeling back the layers and the historical context of everything that brought us to this point. And so even if everything plays out the way that we want it to, we also need to make sure that we're making concrete reforms in the future to make sure that this is never something that can ever be allowed to happen again.
Angela Lang, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.